In 1817, Thomas Jefferson wrote to his granddaughter from Monticello describing a new vegetable he was testing in his experimental gardens. He called it Sea Kale, a perennial from Europe that could withstand Virginia winters and produce tender shoots before any other spring vegetable. Jefferson, obsessed with agricultural innovation, had imported seeds from England and was documenting its growth meticulously. His notes described covering the plants with wooden boxes and mounding soil to force white shoots in February, weeks before his peas or lettuce could be planted. He served them at dinner parties, comparing the flavor to asparagus crossed with the finest cabbage hearts. By the 1820s, American seed catalogs from Philadelphia to Boston were advertising Sea Kale. Wealthy estates from Massachusetts to Maryland planted it. Market gardens in New York sold forced sea kale shoots at prices that rivaled fresh oysters. But while American gardeners were experimenting with this European import, coastal foragers in Maine and Massachusetts discovered something remarkable. Wild sea kale relatives were already growing on American beaches. They did not need Jefferson's wooden boxes or elaborate forcing systems because for thousands of years, these plants had been thriving on Atlantic shorelines. It required nothing. No planting, no cultivation, just knowledge of when to harvest. In early spring, they would walk to the shingle beaches where sea kale grew naturally. They would pile stones over the emerging shoots to blanch them. 2 weeks later, they would return and harvest shoots as tender as anything the Duke's gardener produced. It cost them nothing. It returned every year. And unlike the annual cabbages that required spring planting, summer care, and fall harvest, sea kale simply existed. Permanent, perennial, self-sufficient. Today we are opening the file on the vegetable that Thomas Jefferson imported, American estates cultivated, and then vanished so completely from U.S. gardens that most people today think it is inedible seaweed. Not because it failed, but because it refused to fit in a straight row. To understand why this plant disappeared from American gardens, you first have to understand what we lost. If you walked into a Hudson Valley estate garden in 1850, or a Philadelphia market garden, or a Charleston plantation kitchen garden, sea kale was there. It occupied permanent beds that lasted 20 to 30 years. The plants were massive, 3 feet across, with thick gray-green leaves like cabbage, but more substantial, more architectural. In late winter, before anything else woke up, sea kale sent up thick shoots from the crown. These shoots, if left to grow naturally, were green and slightly bitter. But if you covered them, denied them light, they grew pale, ivory white, tender, and sweet. That is what American gardeners learned from European techniques. The art of forcing. The forced shoots, called shards, were harvested when they reached 6 to 8 inches long. They were boiled briefly, or steamed, and served with butter. The flavor was delicate, complex, nothing like modern cabbage. Descriptions from American cookbooks of the 1800s compare it to asparagus, to artichoke hearts, to the most tender parts of cauliflower. It was featured in restaurants in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Market gardeners near major cities grew it specifically for wealthy customers who would pay premium prices for the first fresh vegetable of spring. But sea kale did not stop there. After the spring shoots were harvested, the plant was allowed to grow naturally. By summer, it produced leaves. Young leaves could be cooked like spring greens or cabbage. They had a slightly sharper flavor than the shoots, but were still mild and tender. The plant also flowered in late spring, producing masses of white, honey-scented blossoms that attracted bees. Some American gardeners ate the flower buds before they opened, prepared like broccoli. And in fall, the plant produced seeds. Large, round seeds that could be pickled and eaten like capers. One plant, multiple harvests across 3 seasons. And unlike annual cabbages that required replanting every year, sea kale was permanent. You planted it once, from seed or from root cuttings, and it produced for 20 to 30 years. Some Northeast estate gardens had sea kale beds that were 40 years old, still producing, still productive, maintained by generations of the same gardening staff. Nutritionally, sea kale was superior to cultivated cabbage in ways that 19th century Americans recognized but could not fully explain. It was recommended in medical journals for invalids and people with weak digestion because it was easier to digest than cabbage. Modern analysis shows why. Sea kale contains higher levels of vitamin C than cabbage, more calcium, more iron, and more trace minerals. This makes sense because it evolved on coastal beaches where it absorbed minerals from sea spray and thrived in harsh, salty conditions that would kill most vegetables. It is a survival plant, a nutrient concentrator, and a perennial that asks for almost nothing. So where is it? Why are we spending billions breeding heat-tolerant cabbages and shipping them across the country when a perennial cabbage that grows in marginal soil, tolerates salt, survives harsh winters, and produces for decades already exists growing wild on Atlantic beaches? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is an economics problem. The decline of sea kale in America began in the 1880s with the expansion of the railroad system across the United States. For the first time, fresh vegetables could be transported from California and the South to northern cities fast enough to arrive in edible condition. This created the demand for year-round cabbage. But sea kale did not fit the new industrial model. First, the harvest season was wrong. Sea kale produced shoots in late winter and early spring, February through April. This was perfect for estate gardens and local markets in the Northeast, where early vegetables commanded premium prices. But the industrial food system wanted consistent supply year-round. Cabbages could be planted in succession from spring through fall in California and Texas, creating continuous harvests. Different varieties could be shipped north in every season. Annual cabbages fit the railroad schedule. Sea kale did not. Second, the harvest method was incompatible with American agricultural scale. Forcing sea kale required labor, covering plants with boxes or mounding soil, then uncovering, then harvesting by hand. You could not mechanize it. One skilled gardener could maintain 200 to 300 sea kale plants and produce enough shoots for a household or local market. But a California farm growing annual cabbages could plant 10,000 heads per acre using new mechanical seeders, harvest them with crews of workers, and load them directly onto refrigerated rail cars. The numbers favored annuals. Third, sea kale required patience that American business would not tolerate. From seed, sea kale took 2 to 3 years to reach full production. In the first year, you got nothing. In the second year, a small harvest. By the third year, full production. But annual cabbages produced in 90 to 120 days from transplant. California farmers could get 2 or 3 crops per year. The financial return on annual cabbages was faster, more predictable, and easier to finance. Banks would lend money to plant cabbages for a 90-day return, they would not wait 3 years for sea kale. And fourth, American seed companies saw the business problem. Sea kale was too independent. It grew on coastal beaches. Anyone along the Maine, Massachusetts, or Long Island coast could harvest wild relatives for free. And once planted in a garden, it produced for 20 to 30 years without needing new seed.